Welcome to Changing Course. I'm your host, Maya Adam, and I am delighted to welcome today's guest, the incomparable Arianna Huffington. Arianna is the founder and CEO of Thrive Global, an organization that's dedicated to spreading science-based approaches to managing stress and preventing burnout. She also founded the famous Huffington Post. She's the author of 15 books, and Time magazine named her among the world's 100 most influential people. Arianna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Maya, it's so great to be with you.
Arianna, you've had such an incredibly successful career, but I know that it wasn't always easy for you, especially at the start of that career. And I read something that you posted recently about perseverance, and you talked about what it was like when your first book was initially rejected, and then you had to persevere to get it to really become a book. Can you tell us about that time?
Actually, it was even kind of a little harder because my first book, which I published at the age of 23, was a big success. And then my second book was rejected by 37 publishers.
Unbelievable.
And by that time, I had run out of money. I was living in London at the time. And I started wondering whether my first book was a fluke, and I had to start thinking of a new career. And I was walking down St. James's Street in London and saw a Barclays Bank in the corner. And something made me just walk in and ask for a loan, or as they call them in London, an overdraft. And I had no assets, but the bank manager gave me a loan. And that was really what kept things together for a few more rejections until finally a publisher published the book. The book didn't do well, but it was really a confirmation that I could stay on this writing path. And, Maya, I was very blessed to have a mother who always used to say, failure is not the opposite of success, it's a stepping stone to success. So she gave me a lot of strength and resilience to overcome obstacles and to overcome also the voice in our own head, that I call the obnoxious roommate living in our head that puts us down,
I love that.
judges us, and even worse than any outside critic, often makes it harder to continue.
That's fascinating. I recently heard somebody talking about the power of keeping a failure resume, where you actually keep track of your failures. And they said, if you don't have anything to put on that resume, you're not taking enough risks.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's particularly important for women because so often we have such an idea of perfectionism and doing everything perfectly. And the truth is that when you take risks, when you aim high, there are no guarantees of success.
Right. And we can also play it safe and still fail. So why not take the risk, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. That's such good advice. And Arianna, during that time when you were, getting those rejections, how did you maintain a sense of belief in yourself and what you were trying to do?
So I really believed in what I wanted to communicate. My first book was about the changing role of women. And my second book was about the crisis in political leadership, which is even worse now than it was then. And I think I cared a lot about communicating that message and getting the message out. And that really sustained me. The difference was that I had to learn to tell a story. My books were very academic. I had studied economics at Cambridge, and I hadn't yet learned how to communicate as a storyteller. And that's when I feel I was very blessed because an English publisher came to me and asked me to write a biography of Maria Callas as my third book. And at first I said, no, I'm not a biographer. And he said, you need to learn to write in a way that touches people's hearts and communicates with them. And I think writing the story of a great opera singer, very flawed and human, her relationships, everything, was an incredible education.
Wow. That's so powerful. I mean, we always, when we're creating health messages, we always say that you can't change somebody's mind until you touch their heart.
I
And
love
maybe that's the same kind of thinking. It's very, very important, right?
Absolutely, so important. And that's kind of the storytelling gift.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Okay, so on a related note, Arianna, I want to ask you about a tension that I think many of us face because we've been raised to kind of never give up, never be a quitter. And sometimes the right thing to do is actually to quit and change course and give something up so that you can move on to something better. And I wonder if you have any tips for our listeners about how to recognize when a change of course like that might be the best route.
Absolutely. I love that, Maya. I'm so happy you're focusing on this in the podcast because I think it's so important. And again, it requires taking risks. For me, the biggest moment was when I was running the Huffington Post. It had been 11 years since I had founded it. And it had been a big success. We were in 20 countries. We had won a Pulitzer. It was a global media company. But by then, I knew that I wanted to launch a company that could help people change behaviors. I had already been covering issues around well-being and our health and productivity and recovery exhaustively at the Huffington Post with great success. But I wanted to move beyond raising awareness to helping people change behaviors, and I couldn't do that through a media company. I had to build a behavior change technology company. And that was an incredibly hard decision because I was literally leaving not just a very successful company, but a company that was like a third child. I have two daughters, and the Huffington Post felt like a third child to start again. And I remember talking to a girlfriend, and she said to me, stop making lists of pros and cons. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and jump. And that's what I did. And I can't tell you how grateful I am that I did it because it's what my heart wanted to do. It's what my passion has been all these years. And I think very often, especially when people have succeeded in one area, it's even harder to give it up and start something new.
Yeah, fascinating. We have to really listen to that inner voice more, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. And Arianna, on the topic of behavior change, you have done such amazing work with Thrive to help people live happier, healthier lives. But it's tough to help people to change patterns and maybe give up bad habits. Do you have tips for our audience on what you've discovered to be the most successful ways to do that?
Absolutely. It is hard, but it's particularly hard because we've been approaching it the wrong way. We've been approaching behavior change through New Year resolutions, big, ambitious, I'm going to give up sugar or I'm going to go to the gym an hour a day. And the truth is that behavior change, as we know from all scientists, including the chair of our scientific board, a colleague of yours at Stanford, BJ Fogg, that behavior change actually happens through what we call micro steps, tiny, daily, incremental steps that cumulatively become healthier habits. So I now feel, after 10 years of working on this with a great scientific board, that we've cracked the code of behavior change, that it's a combination of micro steps, stories that touch people's hearts, as you were saying earlier, and community. Community is key because it consists of accountability bodies, people who support us on the journey. And right now, the other thing that's so important, Maya, is to recognize that daily behaviors that lead to health are interconnected. Because a lot of the time we look at them as point solutions. So for us at Thrive, we've brought all 5 key daily behaviors onto our platform and have shown how the one affects the other. And they are sleep, food, movement, stress management, and connection. Because very often we look at a sleep app, I'm wearing my Aura ring, or emphasis on what you eat, but you don't often see the connections that if you are sleep deprived and exhausted, you are going to crave bad carbs and sugars. So seeing these connections and the links among these 5 key behaviors, and increasingly, Maya, we see that as healthcare around the world is going in the wrong direction, with skyrocketing increases in chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, we see that if we don't start focusing on daily behaviors, it's going to be really hard to improve people's health span and fix what's happening in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you are sort of a real role model in terms of behavior change, because I was so moved by the story you told about your own personal experience with burnout and how that motivated you to change your behaviors and find balance. And I wonder if you mind sharing that story and maybe giving us some other tips on how you achieved balance?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't use the word balance, Maya, because I really think that I don't think we can have balance in our lives in the sense of 50-50 work and life and the rest of
Okay.
life. Because the truth is that there are days when we have a sick child and that dominates everything. And there are days when we have a deadline on a project and that dominates everything. So
Yeah.
I think it's best to think of it as integration
Mm,
and as
excellent.
recovery, making sure that we give time to recovery. Because if we give time for us to recover, then we are able to be fully recharged and tackle everything much more effectively. For me, as you said, my wake-up call was in 2007, 2 years into building the Huffington Post, when I collapsed from sleep deprivation, exhaustion, burnout, as I was diagnosed with, and hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone. And that was the beginning of my studying the phenomenon of burnout and seeing that it wasn't just my personal problem, but a global epidemic.
Right.
And we started covering these issues at the Huffington Post. I wrote 2 books on the subject, Thrive and The Sleep Revolution. And then I founded a whole company on it. But it all started because I had been really victim of this collective delusion that in order to succeed, we have to burn out. We have to be always on.
Yeah. And Arianna, do you think that's something that, I mean, you mentioned that especially women, we tend to try and be perfect at everything we do. But do you think that, for women, are we more at risk of burnout?
Well, I think both men and women are at risk. I mean, we see men with heart attacks, um, who with um, again growing numbers of both men and women being diabetic. All these are diseases that are very affected by how we live, our levels of stress, how we eat, how we sleep. I think women still have a greater responsibility for the home. And we saw that during the pandemic when women in large numbers left the workplace because it was impossible for them to manage schooling at home, taking care of
Yeah.
everything at home, and a job. So I think both sexes are prone to this delusion around burnout because we think that's the only way to be successful. And now it's actually great to see more and more people recognizing that recovery is part of peak performance. And we see it with
Right.
athletes. You know, athletes know that if they're going to be great on the court or in the field, they have to be very disciplined about their sleep, their food, their stress management.
Right. Yeah. So, okay, so men and women, I mean, equally, we're all equally at risk of this. But I wonder too, if you think in your experience, just because you are such a powerful role model for professional women, I know you are for me as a professional woman, do you think things have changed in terms of sort of gender equity in the workplace? Or are we just better at maybe masking it and saying the right things?
I think there's still a way to go. Also, Maya, we have the likability paradox, you know, that women are much more likely to be called difficult or criticized as ambitious, which are all terms that are used very differently when applied to men. You know, they would be described as bald. So there are still a lot of approaches to men and women that are different. We're making progress, but we're not there yet.
Excellent. That's such a good answer. Yeah. Okay. So, Arianna, and just to take that one step further, a question about the kind of post-pandemic era that we're in right now. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but I've certainly noticed a shift in people's sort of ability to commit themselves to things. I feel like we were very close to seeing death, very near to us, something many of us haven't experienced. And I sometimes wonder whether there's a little bit of sort of post-traumatic stress syndrome going on, and people are sort of very focused on the here and now and not as focused as we were on long-term plans and long-term success. Have you noticed that? And do you think it's had an impact on people?
I think there's no question that the pandemic was like a portal that helped us look at our values, at what did we really want out of life, which I thought was all for the good because, as I wrote in Thrive, you know, we have tended to associate success with just these two metrics of money and status/power. And through the pandemic, as you said, by being closer to death, we started looking at what really makes a good life. And for me, it's really the third leg of the stool. Sure, you know, money, status, but the third leg of the stool is first of all, our health,
Mm-hmm.
our capacity to be in the moment and experience wonder and experience the mystery of life, tapping into our own wisdom and giving. For me, that's a complete life. And so I think the fact that we we were so close to death, and it's not like COVID is over.
Yeah.
Just that three friends were diagnosed with COVID today. Um, it kind of helps us put everything in perspective.
Right. Yeah. And Arianna, on that point of things that matter, many of our guests, when I ask them, about what really at the end of the day matters, they talked a lot about the kind of powerful role that their families had played in shaping them and supporting them throughout their careers. And I remember reading the beautiful tribute that you wrote after your mother passed away. And I've had the pleasure of also getting to meet your sister. I know you're very connected with your family. Sometimes I wonder if our society might be better off if we could stay a little more connected to our families, but I know it's not always possible. I wonder if you can
Yes.
talk a little bit more about the role of family in achieving real success.
I feel very blessed to have had an amazing mother and a father, but my mother was so instrumental in everything I did in my life, and also to be incredibly close to my sister, my two daughters. I now have a grandson
I
who
know.
is 14 months old and is just walking, which is a huge joy. But also, I think coming from Greece, there is this emphasis on an extended family.
Yeah.
I know that's not always possible, but whenever possible, it's amazing to have, grandparents and relatives who can help you bring up your children rather than being just with your nuclear family. And with the childcare crisis now, it gets harder and harder. So, no question, it's a real gift. And even though not everybody has access to that gift, it's
Yeah.
something which I feel incredibly grateful in my life.
And Arianna, speaking of that lovely new addition to your family, your grandson, what do you find yourself wishing for him for the future of our world?
I really think the most important thing is for him to be resilient, because much though we want to protect our children and our grandchildren, we are living in incredibly turbulent and uncertain times. And ultimately, what matters is how can we deal with all the obstacles and the challenges and the pain that may be in store for us. And you see, Maya, that often the same event, the same challenge can completely throw someone off, or someone else can be able to get through it. So that's why I think resilience is the greatest gift we can wish our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, that's definitely a big theme that we've heard in this podcast, and something that's been in my life. There have been a few times when I've had the rug pulled out from under me because someone, was diagnosed with something, or there was an unexpected shift. And each time when we've gotten through that, somehow I have felt so much stronger. I felt like proud of us as a family that we managed to navigate that.
I
Have you
feel the
had
same
those
way.
experiences?
My youngest daughter, and she was hit by a bike 5 years ago in the West Village, and she hit her head on the pavement. She suffered for 5 years with terrible, excruciating headaches.
Oh,
And after 19 doctors, she's now doing better, not 100% better, but like 85% better. And um, it was a very hard journey, but all of us as a family were in it together. And now she decided to change profession. She has studied art, and now she's at the Harvard Divinity School.
oh,
She wants to help people with chronic pain because she found that her own faith, her own tapping into her spiritual dimension had helped tremendously navigating her pain.
Wow. Well, I've seen some of her art and it is beautiful. I love her work. So I'm glad
Thanks.
she's pursuing a new passion. Arianna, my last question to you. If you had to give advice to people who are just starting out in their careers right now, what would your one piece of advice be that might help them reach their own dreams?
So, Maya, the thing that I wish I knew earlier is that life is a dance between making it happen and letting it happen. Very often we think we have to make every little thing happen. And the truth is that I really believe we are being held by the universe. Things happen, things come our way that we need to be open to receive. And when we have that sense of trust, that there is a blueprint to our lives, and that we need to be open to what comes our way, to bring joy onto the journey and not just the destination, I think there is so much more love and gratitude along the way.
That is beautiful. And I think that is a wonderful place to wrap this up. Life is a dance between making it happen and letting it happen. I think that is the tagline for this episode. Arianna, thank you so much for making the time to join us today.
Thank you so much, Maya. I loved being with you. Thank you for all you are doing.